Hello people, I would like to discuss the Economics November 2011 paper with you today. As you know, the question paper consists of 10 questions and we are going to focus on micro and macroeconomics today. So we're going to start with question 1, which is microeconomics, looking at the first question. First question says, choose the correct word from those given in brackets. Household savings are channeled through the labor or the financial market. Now, the labor market is where you would receive your wages, your salaries at the end of every week or at the end of every month. But the financial market is where you would take your savings and deposit it into a banking account. So if we talk about savings, the answer would be financial market. Question 1.2. Real and money flows move in the same or opposite direction in the economic circular flow model. Now we know that the real flow includes the flow of goods and services and the flow of factors of production. So the flow of money would be the payment for the factors of production and the payment for goods and services. Therefore, it moves in opposite directions. (1.3) Terms of trade or agreement describes the relationship between export prices and import prices. The answer is trade, terms of trade. 1.4. Financial aid schemes in rural areas form part of the government's economic or social services. Now, I looked at the government's memo for this question, and they actually, at the end, when they did the marking, they actually took both of these answers as correct because it depends on how you look at the question. Financial aid schemes could benefit the economy, but it could also benefit the people in the specific community. So therefore, either one of these answers would be right. Economic or social. So if you come across a question like this in the exam, choose the one that you think is most correct. But if there's any mistake in the question, then they will give you the benefit of the doubt and you will get the marks. Moving on to question 2. List any 3 examples of community goods. Now, community goods would be those goods that the community will benefit from. For instance, the infrastructure in the specific area. For instance, hospitals that is made available, street lights, schools that are made available to the people. You can mention any 3 of those. The important thing is that no one will be excluded from these services. Question 3. Study the table below and answer the questions that follow. The balance of payments for South Africa, they indicate the different or the breakdown of the different aspects in the current account: merchandise exports, service receipts, service payments, merchandise import, income receipts, income payments, net gold exports. Now the question is, define the concept balance of payment. The balance of payment is a record of all the transactions between one country and the rest of the world so that they can actually determine whether they are importing more or exporting more. If you are importing more, it means that money is flowing out of the country and that would lead to a deficit on the balance of payment. If more products are exported, that means money is coming into the country and that would lead to a positive or a surplus on the balance of payment. Now looking at the table, question 3.2, calculate the trade balance in the balance of payment. Now, the trade balance is about the difference between goods imported and goods exported. The important thing that you have to remember is that gold is indicated separately on the balance of payment account for the specific reason that gold is a big or makes up a big part of the balance of payment. So when you look at your merchandise export and import, make sure that you actually look at what happened to gold. I'm going to do the calculation as follows. You look at merchandise exports, that is 503 656. Make sure that you include net gold exports. So that is plus 52776. And you get to your total answer, which is 556,432. And keep in mind that when you look at the table, at the heading of the table, it actually indicates that it is in million of rands. So if you just write that total, you haven't written the correct answer. To be able to calculate the trade balance, now you have to take this total minus merchandise imports, which will be 554,161. Final answer, 2,271 million rand. Don't forget to write million rand. Question 3.3. How will the trade balance be affected if a major South African retailer imports more clothes from China? You all know that if you import more, that means that all the money is going out of the country. Money leaves the country. That will cause a deficit on the balance of trade and eventually on the balance of payments. So you would rather want our country to export to other countries. .4. Name the item omitted which is required to calculate the balance of the current account. That means that you have to go back to your table and you see what needs to be included in the current account. Merchandise export, that's fine. Merchandise export, service receipts, service payments. Merchandise import, income receipts, income payments, net gold exports. The one that is missing is current transfers. Question 4. Study the extract below and answer the questions that follow. Fiscal changes likely to continue. The medium-term budget policy statement, MTBPS, shows a planned increase in government expenditure to 977 billion rand in 2011-2012, a rise of 8%, including a jobs fund totaling 9 billion over the next 3 years and 20 billion rand in tax allowances and tax breaks to promote investment in the manufacturing sector. The Industrial Policy Action Plan, IPAP, and the New Growth Path Framework, NGPF, prioritize the manufacturing sector as a creator of jobs for semi or unskilled workers. For the national budget to be consistent with stated government objectives, government expenditure will increasingly have to support a growth agenda. South Africa's first priority is economic growth and job creation. The government's efforts with regard to social and redistribution issues exceeds those devoted to creating a growth-friendly environment. And this was taken from Business Report, February 2011. Now, the questions will all be based on this. Don't skip these passages because very often you find some of the answers in these passages. 4.1. What does fiscal changes mean? Now, when you study economics, you need to be able to distinguish between the government's fiscal policy and the monetary policy. The fiscal policy involves taxes and government spending, and the monetary policy is managed by the South African Reserve Bank, and this results in a change in interest rates eventually from the side of the commercial banks. 4.1, you will then have to write the following answer referring to government spending. And taxation. Right, we move on to the next question, 4.2. Give one reason why you think the government is targeting the manufacturing sector as a creator of jobs. Now, the economy consists of 3 sectors, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary sector. The manufacturing sector is a part of the secondary sector, and this is where all the changing of the raw materials into the final products actually take place. So if they decide to improve job opportunities or increase the job opportunities in the manufacturing industry, it means that you will need a lot of unskilled labor as well. So a lot of more people will benefit from this. And you can mention that there will be more opportunities. Question 4.3. What do you understand by government expenditure will increasingly have to support a growth agenda? The important keywords that I want you to underline in a question like this would be growth agenda. Because when we see the word growth, that refers to economic growth. Agenda means that there needs to be a plan. And the plan in this case is the government's budget. In other words, to achieve economic growth, the government must plan in their budget how they are going to be able to create more job opportunities. We now move on to question 4.4. Select a phrase from the extract to show why there is insufficient growth in the economy. For this, I want to go back to the passage at the start of question 4, and I found the answer right in the last paragraph. South Africa's first priority is economic growth and job creation. So this is what we are achieving or trying to achieve. We are trying to achieve economic growth and job creation. The government's efforts with regard to social and redistribution issues exceeds those devoted to creating a growth-friendly environment. So at this stage, they are not doing enough to encourage economic growth and job creation. So you will look at the second sentence in this paragraph, starting there, ending there. Now that we've completed question 4, I would like us to take a break. After the break, we will continue with question 5. Welcome back from the ad break. We're now going to look at question 5. Question 5 is an 8-mark question, which means that you have to discuss the topic in a little bit more detail. Because it's for 8 marks, it's suggested that you write at least 4 facts. Let's look at the question. It says, discuss the endogenous approach as a cause of business cycles. Endogenous means changes from the inside, and a business cycle refers to those changes in economic activities over a period of time. I want us to move on to the memo so that you can see the different aspects that you can actually cover in this question. So this is the suggested memo. Also known, in other words, when we talk about the endogenous approach, that means it's also known as the Keynesian approach or the interventionists. Those are the people who believe that the economy cannot function on its own. It does need some form of intervention from the government to control the economy and to try and keep the business cycle as even as possible. They hold the view that markets are inherently unstable. In other words, there are changes, there are increases and decreases in economic activity that we do not have any control over. Bullet point 3, the level of economic activity constantly tend to be continually above or below its potential. So even though we have an upward trend in the economy, we sometimes perform above the potential and sometimes below the potential. So it is important that there's some form of control over this process to make sure that we at least keep to the trend and that we keep on having an upward trend in the economy. So this is where they talk about the level of economic activity constantly tend to be continually above or below its potential. Price mechanisms fail to coordinate demand and supply in the market. Now, when we talk about a price mechanism, In the perfect market, prices are determined by the interaction between demand and supply. Now, we all know that we don't operate in a perfect market, that we operate in the imperfect market, that we have monopolies, we have oligopolies, etc. And all these things actually interfere with the normal interaction between demand and supply. The problem that we're sitting with is in the next bullet point, prices are not flexible enough. When you look at wages, for instance, prices of products will change all the time, but wages are usually just adjusted once a year after negotiations. So endogenous forces, that's the next point. For instance, the ripple effect or the indirect links, mismatches, and disequilibria. That means where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied is not the same. Disequilibria and mismatches. And that causes cyclical fluctuations. That means increases or decreases in economic activities. Business cycles is an inherent feature of the market economy. And the reason why it is part of the market economy is because we have so many different decision makers in the economy. In a centralized economy, the government will make all the decisions. They will decide what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce. Whereas in a market economy, all these decisions are made by different people. And as a result of that, business cycles will take place. Next bullet point, peaks and troughs. That is what you can expect to see in a business cycle. That's your next point. I'd like to underline those keywords. Peaks and troughs are smoothed out by the government's interventionist policies. Now, those policies are mainly known as the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Earlier on, we mentioned the fiscal policy, which means that the government, through changing taxation, have an influence on the amount of money that people have available to spend. They also look at their own spending, because if they spend more, they lead to an increase in the demand for products, which will lead to an increase in the prices of products. The second policy is the monetary policy. The monetary policy is controlled by the South African Reserve Bank on behalf of the government. What they do is they change the repo rate. Now, the repo rate is the rate at which commercial banks will borrow money from the South African Reserve Bank. If they increase the repo rate, it means it becomes more expensive for commercial banks to borrow money from the South African Reserve Bank, and therefore the commercial banks will increase their interest rates that they charge the consumers. The moment that they increase the interest rates, people will borrow less money because borrowing money becomes more expensive. I want us to look at the next point, perceptions or predictions about the future. And this is all about how people are influenced by things that they hear. If people are told that the price of petrol is going to increase at a certain time, some people will go and fill up their tanks, basically causing an increase in the demand for the product, and because they increase the demand for the product, that actually encourages an increase in the price for the product. So very often what people think and what people feel will lead to a certain reaction in future. Okay, then there are certain factors inside the market that will lead to a change in the economic activity at a specific time. And then what they also allowed in this exam, in the memo, was that you could draw a business cycle. What you have to keep in mind is that you're not going to get that many marks to draw the business cycle, because that is not what the question specifically required. Straight after that, the economy's growth path is indicated by the thin black line. So in other words, when you look at the line here, that is actually your trend line. And then from there onwards, any change that you see, this wave motion shows as it goes up, the increase in economic activity, and as it goes down, the decrease in economic activity. So it says here that the bold cyclical movements around it are actually the route followed by the economy. Peaks and troughs are smoothed out by the government's interventionist policies. In other words, the government is actually trying to move closer to the trend rather than above the trend or below the trend. And they do this by making changes to the fiscal policy and to the monetary policy. In this question, you had to give examples as well, but it will not be worth more than 2 marks out of the complete 8 marks. Question 6. Discuss the interaction between households and the state as participants in the economic circular flow. In this case, they would like you to focus on the role played or the interaction between the households and the government. Now, when you operate in an open economy, there are 4 participants in the economy, which would be the households, the government, the businesses, and the foreign sector. In this case, we'll probably only operate in a closed economy because it's only the interaction between the households and the government. The households is where everything starts. They are the owners of the factors of production. And as owners of the factors of production, they make that available to the government because the government owns businesses that need to employ people. So the factors of production are made available to the government. They are not going to make available the factors of production for free. They need something in return. So the government will make a payment in the form of wages, salaries, rent, interest, and profit. There's another relationship between the government and the households because the government makes available public goods and services. And when they make this available, they need some form of income, and therefore the consumer or the household will pay taxes to the government. And when I look at this, I've indicated at least 2 flows for each one of the participants. So the households must pay money and they must receive something. They must offer the factors of production and they must receive something. The government, on the other hand, they receive factors of production that pay wages, salaries, rent, interest, and profit, and they make available public goods and services, and in return they will receive taxes. I know that we've already discussed the memo, but I want us to actually go back to the memorandum so that you can see exactly what the marks were awarded for. Keywords that you may use when you write this answer would be the household sector provides the state with labor, and that would be a factor of production. In return, they receive income. The state provides the households with public goods and services, and it's always a good idea to write down some examples. So public goods and services. And what do we know about public goods and services? That no one can be excluded from that. So that would include things like parks and hospitals, roads, street lights, and then for which they pay taxes. And we know that everyone doesn't pay the same amount of taxes, and that we have different forms of taxation that we charge to different members of the community. And this is seen as an income for the state. In other words, the taxes are paid to the government. It is seen as an income that they use to spend on making available public goods and services. I want us to go into an ad break again, and I'll see you again with question 7. Welcome back from the ad. I want us to now look at question 7. Very important when you look at an essay question, expect it to be divided into 2 parts. Underline the keywords and make sure that you understand exactly what is expected from you. The layout of the essay is also very important. In economics, when you write an essay, you need to answer in point form. You start your essay by writing an introduction. The introduction will usually be a definition of the concept that you are going to discuss. Then the rest of your answers or the body will be in point form. The first section will usually be worth 30 marks. The second part of the question usually 10 marks. Then you end off your essay by writing a conclusion. And the conclusion must actually fit with what you just discussed. When the teacher marks your paper, once she's added up all the marks that you got out of 40, there will be a mark for the 5 marks for introduction and conclusion, and another 5 marks for interpretation. In other words, that you really understand the topic. And this will depend on the number of marks that you got out of 30 for the content that you actually wrote. Let's look at question 7. Discuss the main supply reasons for international trade. Now this question I see consists of only one part. There's no second part to this question. So the focus will be on supply reasons and international trade. So to start a question like this, it's very important when you write your introduction that you write something about international trade. I'm going to work through the memo with you and we'll see what we can add and what is less important in the memo. The important thing is when you look at the introduction, they've actually given at least 3 different possibilities. So they're not always that strict on what you are supposed to write in the introduction, as long as you talk about the topic that you're going to discuss. Please do not write in your introduction, I am going to write about the following. The same goes for your conclusion. Do not write, I have just discussed, because we know that that is exactly what you did or what you are going to do. The introduction here, no country can survive on its own, as trade is the basic component of economic activity and is undertaken for mutual advantage. So in this case, we indicate that international trade takes place to the advantage of everyone involved. And we know that we cannot produce everything that we need for ourselves. The second possibility for the introduction is that countries offer goods for trade because they have resources that other countries do not have. And this will be repeated in your discussion later on, where you indicate that certain resources are only available in certain countries and for different reasons. The next possibility, international trade, is trade across borders. In other words, trade between different countries. And your introduction will be worth 3 marks. Moving on to the body, we now take the different supply reasons. It is advisable that you do your layout in a specific way in order to make it easier for the person who's marking the paper. Starting with a heading that you underline, and then leave open lines between the different points in your essay so that it is just easier to see where the different points start and end. The first reason then for international trade would be natural resources. Natural resources, that's one example of a factor of production, and you can expect to get 2 marks for your heading. They are not evenly distributed across all countries of the world. They vary from country to country. So to start with, larger and smaller quantities of the factors of production or the natural resources are available in different quantities. In some countries, they are not available at all. So it's important that you refer to not evenly distributed. They vary from country to country, so it's not the same. And in some cases, it can actually happen that some of the natural resources are exploited. So the country runs out of the natural resource and it needs to get it from another country. So in some cases, it is exploited. Each country has its own unique mix of natural resources that makes it possible for them to produce certain goods and services more efficiently and at a relatively lower price. This is where we get to the point of comparative advantage, and you can actually mention this in your answer. This means that you might even be in a situation where you can produce the product, but you prefer to specialize in another product because you can make more money from producing the other product and then save in the process by importing the product from another country. Now, the example that they have here is that South Africa's gold and diamond resources has given us an advantage in producing gold and diamonds. So we would focus on the production of gold and diamonds and rather import some of the other minerals. So gold and diamonds is a good example that you can use in your test. Climatic conditions. We all know that different countries have different climates, and that's why people prefer to stay in certain countries rather than in others. The different climatic conditions have an effect on what natural resources will be available in that country. Differences in climatic conditions between countries make it possible for some countries to produce certain goods at a lower price than other countries. So it might be that a country can produce the product, but because it is very dry or there's a lack of water resources, they prefer to focus on something else and rather import the product from another country. So because they can produce at a lower price. Many crops can only be cultivated in certain climatic conditions and areas and in certain kinds of soil. That is why we very often have to import certain products from other countries because we just cannot produce it in our own country. Topography, this is a very important point. Some countries have very mountainous areas, and even though the soil might be fertile, they cannot make use of it because they actually cannot reach those areas. Looking at another factor of production, that is the labor that is available in a country. The quality, quantity, and cost of labor also differs between countries. It could be that a country decides to have branches in other countries because the cost of labor in those countries are cheaper. And that is why we have globalization, and that is why we have international trade, because we are trying to find those places where we can actually reduce our costs. If we get closer to the source, for instance, the natural resource, or we can get to the areas where the labor costs are not as high, we can actually save on our costs of production. So labor resources, we know that there's a difference in quality, a difference in quantity, and also the cost of labor. So that would be wages and salaries. Then we also know that some countries are very well known for developing certain skills in their people and certain technologies. So some countries have highly skilled labor, and depending on the circumstances, they could be more productive because they maybe have better technology that they work with, because they had a better form of education. This enables them to produce goods and services at a lower price than they are produced in other countries. Certain individuals have greater ability and aptitude for certain tasks. That is why we have division of labor. And division of labor can take place inside a factory, but it can also take place from one country to another. So we can decide that we want to specialize in a specific field because we have developed those skills. So greater ability and aptitude for certain tasks. It's a worldwide phenomenon that some countries have developed a skill and aptitude for the production of certain commodities. It is wise for you to actually come up with an example. For instance, the Swiss are known for watchmaking. They are known for very lovely chocolates. We know that the Brazilians are very well known for producing coffee. You can come up with your own examples. Right, the fourth reason why international trade would take place is because of technology. Having more or better technology available will help you to produce your product at a lower price and very often allow you to offer a better product, a better quality product. Some countries have access to technological resources that enable them to produce certain goods and services at a low unit cost. And when we look at unit cost, that can also be reduced by producing on a large scale. So you can also mention mass production. Because now you can specialize in a specific product because you know something else that you need, you can import from another country. Improved production processes, the availability of equipment and machinery, and other technological factors all influence the supply of goods and services and thereby contribute to cost differences between countries. So let's look at the different aspects that have an influence: production processes, equipment and machinery, other technological factors. All of these can have an influence. And because of that, there's a difference in the cost of production between the different countries. They've used Japan as an example. I've already mentioned earlier on that specialization is one of the reasons why international trade takes place. Some countries specialize in the production of certain goods and services. By specializing in the production of certain goods and services, a country is able to take advantage. That's when they do that, they take advantage of economies of scale. And that means that they can produce at the lowest possible cost, and they maximize their profit, and therefore produce the goods at a comparatively cheaper unit cost. And that unit cost will determine the selling price of the product eventually. And the unit price will eventually determine the selling price. The example that they've used here is the example of Japan, and they have specialized in the production of electronic goods, and they sell them at a much lower price because they have the comparative advantage, a lower price than they can be produced in other countries. And because they sell it at a lower price, countries would rather import from them than to produce it themselves. Here they mention mass production that I mentioned earlier. Because of the division of labor, automation means they replace human labor by making use of machinery and mechanization. Cost differences. The reason for the cost differences would be because the goods and services can be produced at lower cost in one country than in another, and this goes back to the theory of comparative advantage that I explained to you a little bit earlier on. Capital is another important aspect. Not all countries have access to proper capital, and because there's a lack of capital, there cannot be proper development in the areas of technology and reducing costs. Capital cannot be obtained as easily in some countries as in others, and we would obviously know that in developing countries it would be more difficult to come across capital than it is in developed countries. Developed countries usually enjoy an advantage over underdeveloped countries. That means that a developed country actually has more negotiation power. So when it comes to decision making, they have much more say than the developing countries. So I'm going to highlight developing countries and the fact that they have an advantage. Due to a lack of capital, some countries cannot produce all the goods they require themselves, or they may not have the favorable conditions of other countries. It could even be that some countries might have the natural resources, but they do not have the capital and they do not have the technology. And as a result of that, they have to export their raw materials and then import the more expensive final product for their own use. Another thing included here is also the physical infrastructure. In other words, does the country have the infrastructure available to allow them to produce these products? That would include things like communication systems, electricity, water, roads, those type of things. Number 7, economic freedom and competitiveness. If you can produce a product at a lower price, that means that you become more competitive. If you do not have the resources and the skills, you will be less competitive. Economic freedom means you have the choice to actually make certain decisions because you have the finances to back you. And then, of course, number 8, the important thing is if there's a stable government, the economic policies of the country will hopefully be in place. That will give people more confidence to even invest in that country, to make available capital, to invest in the technology that allows that country to produce products at a lower price. But because not all countries have stable governments, that is not always the case. Don't forget when you get to the end of your essay to write your conclusion. The conclusion can be anything that refers back to the essay as long as you don't say that you have discussed the following topic. It is obvious from the above mentioned that supply reasons have a definite impact on international trade, which means that when we look at supply reasons, we can actually determine the reasons why international trade between countries take place. Now that we've finished with today's questions, I would like to give you a few tips that might help you with your exams. The focus will be on the exam paper and exactly what you can expect in the exam paper. The exam paper consists of 3 sections. You have 3 hours to complete the exams and a total of 300 marks. The 3 sections that we're going to cover is Section A, which is compulsory. This consists of short questions from all 4 modules. In other words, the 4 main topics that you covered in this year. Section B consists of questions on each one of the modules, and the last question, question 6, will be a combination of 2 of the other modules. So be very careful when you decide to choose to only study certain sections in your textbook, because it might cost you dearly. Section C is the essay section, where you get 4 essays and you have to choose 2 of those essays. Be very careful when you make your choices. In Section B, when you choose the 3 questions, make sure that it's the 3 questions that you know the most about. So go over all the questions and see what it is that you know and what you don't understand before you make your decision. Because if you decide to choose or to answer 4 or 5 of the questions, only the first 3 will be marked. If you decide to answer more and you decide that your second question is not that good, just draw a line through it and maybe just write to the person who's going to do the marking that they should not mark that question. So make sure that at all times it is very clear to the person who's going to mark the paper exactly what you want them to mark. In Section B, then question 2 will be on the first topic, which is macroeconomics. Question 3 will be on the second topic, microeconomics. Question 4 will be on the third topic, which is economic pursuits. And question 5 will be on contemporary economic issues. So make sure exactly which topics you know the most about before you decide what to answer. Another tip that I want to give you is when you answer your questions in Section A, especially multiple choice and the short questions, do not number your questions in the zigzag order. Start at the top and number right to the bottom, because it makes it very difficult for the person who's actually going to mark your paper. If you make it easy, if you write neatly, if you leave open lines, then it just makes it easier for the person who does the marking. You have to also keep in mind that it might be different people that's going to mark your paper, and it must be very clear to them where that specific question starts. Now that we've completed the questions, I would like us to look at the question paper, the layout of the question paper, and what is expected from you when you answer this paper. I would also like to give you a few tips that might help you in answering this paper. The question paper consists of a total of 300 marks. You have 3 hours to complete the paper, and it consists of the 3 sections. Section A is compulsory, and that consists of all the short questions like multiple choice, one word for the following, match the columns, true and false, those type of questions. That will be a total of 50 marks. Then when you move on to Section B, you have 5 questions, of which you must do 3 questions. Be very careful when you make this decision. I advise you to actually read through all the questions before you decide which questions you will answer. Do not answer more than 3 questions, because the first 3 questions will be marked, and anything after that, a line will be drawn through, so you will not get any marks for that. It is actually just a waste of time. From question 2 to question 6, we'll cover the first 4 modules, and then question 6 will be a combination of 2 other modules. Section C will consist of the 4 essay questions. In this section, you only answer 2 questions. You are advised in each section to actually not use more than 25 minutes for every 50 marks, but on the essays, you can use 40 minutes. If you exceed that time, it means that you're eating into the time that you have to write your next essay. So be very careful and do your planning very well. Then some of the tips that I want to give you. Firstly, make sure that you answer your questions in full sentences. By leaving out certain words, you might actually change the meaning of that sentence. When you write your essays or any question where you have to list a few different points, make sure that you answer in point form. You are not writing an essay for English, so we're not looking at full sentences. We only have to name a few concepts. Then it's important that you stick to the question. If you're going to elaborate too much or you write a few paragraphs where you're only asked or required to write 1 or 2 points, you are just wasting your time. You're also advised to underline keywords, especially when you write your essays, to make sure that you cover exactly what is expected from you. When you have to draw a graph, be very careful. Your graphs have to be labeled properly, make use of a ruler, so that it is very clear to the person who's marking it that you actually understand the concept. It's always a good idea to put a heading to each one of your graphs. Before you answer the question, make sure that you actually understand what the question is requiring from you. And here I want to give you some advice. You need to understand what the instruction actually requires from you. Firstly, if you have to write a definition, that means that you have to write a precise meaning. That means that is something that you have to go and study off by heart. You don't just write your general understanding of the concept. You actually have to write the concept as it is understood in economic terms. When you are expected to draw a table or it says tabulate, please make sure that you draw a table. Otherwise, you're not carrying out instructions. When you have to list a number of items, you don't have to elaborate that much, so it can literally be single words. When you are expected to explain or discuss, which is the next point, it is very important that you write a heading, which you underline, and then you elaborate on that heading. Do not repeat your heading in your sentence, because then you can't get extra marks for that. And it's always a good idea to actually write an example. I hope what I said today will actually help you, and I wish you best of luck when you write your exams.